Welcome back. Village life may seem quiet, but murder always finds its way in. In the drowsy heart of St. Mary Mead, where secrets nestled as comfortably as teacups on saucers, a single letter lay on the post office's sorting table, its crisp envelope hiding truths that would soon unravel a village. By morning, it was gone, spirited away under locked doors and watchful eyes, leaving only whispers of wealth, betrayal, and a shadow of deceit. Miss Jane Marple, with her knitting needles and unerring gaze, sensed the stirrings of a deeper game, one where every smile concealed a motive, and every clue masked a lie. In this quiet corner of England, the truth was about to prove as elusive as a wisp of autumn mist. Chapter 1. The Village Post Office. The village of St. Mary Mead, nestled in a gentle fold of the English countryside, wore its autumn hues with a quiet dignity. Leaves, crisp and amber, drifted along the cobblestone lanes, and the air carried the faint tang of wood smoke. At the heart of this unassuming hamlet stood the post office, a squat, ivy-clad building that served as both a lifeline to the outside world and a crucible for local gossip. Its windows, framed by faded green shutters, gleamed in the morning light, and the brass bell above the door chimed with every entrance, announcing arrivals to the curious ears within. On this particular October morning in 1952, the post office was abuzz with more than its usual chatter, for a small but vexing mystery had taken root, one that would soon draw the attention of Miss Jane Marple, that keen observer of human nature whose mind was as sharp as the knitting needles she wielded. Miss Marple, an elderly spinster with a penchant for woolen shawls and a deceptively mild demeanor, had arrived in St. Mary Mead only a fortnight prior to stay with her niece, Joan West, who had recently settled into a charming cottage on the village's edge. Joan, a painter of modest talent but boundless enthusiasm, had invited her aunt to escape the dreariness of her London flat, and Miss Marple, ever fond of the countryside's rhythms, had accepted with alacrity. She sat now in Joan's sitting room, a cozy space cluttered with easels and half-finished canvases, her fingers deftly working a skein of pale blue wool. The morning sun filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the oak floor, and a porcelain teapot steamed gently on the table beside her. "Really, Joan?" Miss Marple remarked, her voice soft, but carrying that faint note of authority that often surprised those who underestimated her. "I do think St. Mary Mead has changed little since my last visit. The houses, the lanes, the people, they all seem to carry on as they always have, don't they?" Joan, a woman in her early 40s with a penchant for bright scarves and a laugh that filled rooms, looked up from her sketch pad. "Oh, Aunt Jane, you'd think time stood still here. But there's always some little drama to keep the tongues wagging. Why, just yesterday, Mrs. Price at the bakery was telling me about a row between the postmaster and his wife. Something about money." I think Miss Marple's eyes, bright and bird-like behind her spectacles, flickered with interest. "Money," she murmured, her needles pausing for a fraction of a second. "It does have a way of stirring up trouble, doesn't it? I remember young Clara in my village years ago who took to borrowing from her employer's till. Such a pity, she was such a bright girl. But human nature, you see, is so very predictable." Before Joan could reply, there came a sharp rap at the door, followed by the breathless entrance of Mrs. Clara Bantry, a stout, cheerful woman whose husband, Colonel Bantry, was a pillar of the village's social order. Mrs. Bantry's cheeks were flushed, and her hat sat slightly askew, as though she had hurried from some urgent errand. "Joan! Miss Marple!" she exclaimed, scarcely pausing to catch her breath. "Have you heard the news? There's been a theft at the post office. A letter, of all things, gone missing overnight. Poor Mr. Wilkins is beside himself, and the village is positively buzzing." Miss Marple set her knitting in her lap, her expression one of polite curiosity, though her mind was already turning over the possibilities. "A letter, you say? How very intriguing. Do tell us more, Mrs. Bantry." Mrs. Bantry, never one to resist a tale, settled into an armchair with a rustle of her tweed skirt. "Well, it's all quite mysterious. Harold Wilkins, he's the postmaster, you know, found it this morning when he opened up. A letter addressed to Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, that wealthy widow who lives at Hargrove Hall. It was on the sorting table last night, sealed and proper, but this morning, poof, gone. And they say it was from her late husband's solicitor in London, something about an inheritance. Can you imagine? The whole village is talking about it." Joan's eyes widened. "An inheritance? That's bound to cause a stir. Mrs. Hargrove's not exactly known for her generosity, is she?" "Not a bit," Mrs. Bantry replied, leaning forward conspiratorially. "She's as tight as a miser's purse, though you'd never know it from that grand house of hers. They say the letter might have held details of a fortune, stocks, properties, who knows what else. And now it's vanished. Wilkins swears he locked the place up tight, but there's no sign of a break-in. Constable Paulk's been called, but you know how he is. Thinks it's just someone's carelessness." Miss Marple tilted her head, her lips pursing slightly. "Carelessness is often a convenient excuse, Mrs. Bantry. But a letter of such importance doesn't simply vanish into thin air. Was anyone else at the post office yesterday evening?" Mrs. Bantry frowned, thinking. "Well, there's young Tommy Bates, the clerk. Nice boy, but a bit dreamy, always talking about moving to London. And Mrs. Wilkins, of course. She helps out sometimes, though everyone knows she and Harold don't always see eye to eye. Oh, and Dr. Elias Croft was there, posting a letter. I saw him myself, looking rather grim, though that's nothing new for him." "Dr. Croft?" Miss Marple repeated softly, as though filing the name away. "The village doctor, isn't he?" "A quiet man, from what I've heard. Quiet as a tomb," Mrs. Bantry agreed. "Came here a few years ago from London, and no one knows much about him. Keeps to himself, mostly. But, oh, Miss Marple, you should see the post office now. Half the village is there, whispering and pointing fingers. It's like something out of one of those detective stories." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Life, Mrs. Bantry, is often more curious than fiction. I think I shall take a walk to the post office myself. Fresh air is so good for one's perspective, don't you think?" An hour later, Miss Marple, clad in a sensible tweed coat and her favorite straw hat adorned with a single rose, made her way down the high street. The village was alive with its usual bustle. Children darted past with hoops, a milk cart rattled by, and Mrs. Price, the baker's wife, stood in her doorway, exchanging news with a neighbor. As Miss Marple approached the post office, she noted the small crowd gathered outside, their voices low but animated. The bell jingled as she stepped inside, and the air smelled faintly of ink and paper, with a hint of lavender from Mrs. Wilkins' perfume. Behind the counter stood Harold Wilkins, a man in his mid-50s with thinning hair and a perpetually anxious expression. His hands fidgeted with a stack of envelopes, and his eyes darted nervously to the door each time the bell rang. Beside him, Tommy Bates, a lanky young man of 20 with a shock of unruly brown hair, was sorting parcels with a distracted air. Mrs. Wilkins, a sharp-featured woman with a tight bun and a pinched mouth, was nowhere to be seen. "Good morning, Mr. Wilkins," Miss Marple said brightly, approaching the counter with a small parcel she had brought as a pretext. "I hear you've had quite a morning." Wilkins started, nearly dropping an envelope. "Oh, Miss Marple." "Yes, it's been, well, dreadful, if I'm honest. That letter to Mrs. Hargrove, gone without a trace. I locked up last night, same as always, but this morning it wasn't there. I've searched high and low, but—" He trailed off, shaking his head. Tommy looked up, his cheeks flushing. "It wasn't my fault, Miss Marple. I checked the table before we closed, and the letter was there, plain as day. Someone must have come in after hours." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Dear me, how unsettling. And no sign of forced entry, I understand?" "None at all," Wilkins said, his voice quavering. "The door was locked tight, and the windows too. It's as if the letter just evaporated." At that moment the bell chimed again, and Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove swept into the post office like a storm cloud. She was a tall, imposing woman in her 60s, dressed in a severe black dress that spoke of mourning long past its sincerity. Her gray hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her eyes, sharp as flint, fixed on Wilkins with undisguised fury. "Mr. Wilkins," she snapped, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the onlookers, "this is an outrage. That letter was of utmost importance, and you've let it slip through your fingers like some incompetent fool. Do you know what it contained? My future, that's what. My late husband's solicitor sent it, and I'll not have it lost, too." "Your negligence!" Wilkins paled, his hands trembling. "Mrs. Hargrove, I assure you, we're doing everything we can. I've notified Constable Polk, and—" "Constable Polk," Mrs. Hargrove interrupted, her tone dripping with scorn. "That man couldn't find his own boots in a fog." "I demand answers, Mr. Wilkins, and I demand them now." Tommy stepped forward, his jaw set. "We're not to blame, ma'am. I locked up proper last night, and Mr. Wilkins checked everything. Someone must have got in somehow." Mrs. Hargrove's gaze turned to him, and for a moment her expression softened, as though appraising him. "Is that so, young man? And what were you doing last night, after you locked up so properly?" Tommy flushed deeper, his hands clenching. "I was home, ma'am, with my mum." "You can ask her." Miss Marple, standing quietly to one side, observed the exchange with keen interest. She noted the slight tremor in Mrs. Hargrove's voice, the way Tommy's eyes flicked to the floor, and the bead of sweat on Wilkins' forehead. "Such a fuss over a letter," she said mildly, as though to herself. "But then, letters can hold such secrets, can't they?" Mrs. Hargrove turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. "And who might you be?" "Oh, just a visitor," Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. "Jane Marple, staying with my niece, Joan West. I do so enjoy a puzzle, though. Perhaps I might be of some small assistance." Mrs. Hargrove snorted. "This is no game, Miss Marple. This is theft." plain and simple, and I'll see someone pay for it." As she stormed out, the crowd parted, whispering anew. Miss Marple lingered, pretending to fuss with her parcel. She glanced at the sorting table, a sturdy oak affair cluttered with envelopes and stamps, and noted a small brass key lying near the edge. "Yours, mister?" "Wilkins?" she asked, pointing. Wilkins started again, snatching it up. "Oh, yes, thank you. Just the spare for the back door. Always misplacing it." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene, but her mind was already weaving connections. She stepped outside into the crisp air, where Mrs. Bantry was waiting, eager for details. "Well?" Mrs. Bantry asked. "What do you make of it, Miss Marple?" Miss Marple adjusted her hat, her eyes scanning the village street. "I think, Mrs. Bantry, that we have a most interesting puzzle on our hands. A letter doesn't vanish without reason, and reasons, in my experience, are often tied to the human heart. Greed, fear, love, they leave traces, you know, as clear as footprints in the snow." Mrs. Bantry shivered, though whether from the autumn chill or Miss Marple's words, she couldn't say. "You think someone in the village took it, then?" "I think," Miss Marple replied, her voice soft but certain, "that someone in St. Mary Mead knows far more than they're letting on, and I intend to find out who." As she walked back to Joan's cottage, her steps light despite her years, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the cast of characters she had already encountered. Harold Wilkins, with his nervous hands and anxious eyes. Did his worry stem from guilt or merely embarrassment? Tommy Bates, young and ambitious, with dreams that might outstrip his means. Mrs. Hargrove, whose anger seemed almost too theatrical, as though masking something deeper. And Dr. Croft, the quiet doctor with a shadowed past, who had been at the post office at just the right time. She thought, too, of Mrs. Wilkins, absent but spoken of, and the whispers of financial strain that clung to her name. Back at the cottage, Joan was waiting, her sketch-pad forgotten. "Aunt Jane, you've got that look in your eye," she said, half laughing. "You're already unraveling something, aren't you?" Miss Marple smiled, settling into her chair and picking up her knitting. "Not unraveling, dear? Not yet. But gathering threads? Yes. And in St. Mary Mead, I suspect, there are many threads to gather." The afternoon passed quietly, but the village was far from still. News of the missing letter spread like wildfire, and by evening every tea shop and pub was alight with speculation. Some said it was Tommy, desperate for money to fund his dreams. Others pointed to Mrs. Wilkins, whose sharp tongue and rumored debts made her an easy target. A few whispered of Dr. Croft, whose reserve was mistaken for secrecy, and Mrs. Hargrove, pacing the halls of her grand house, was said to be drafting a letter of complaint to the Postmaster General himself. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, listened to Joan relay the latest gossip. "They're saying Mrs. Hargrove's inheritance might be worth thousands," Joan said. "No wonder she's in such a state." "Thousands," Miss Marple repeated, her needles clicking rhythmically. "Yes, that would tempt many a soul. But I wonder, Joan, if the letter's value lies not in money, but in what it reveals. Secrets, you see, are worth more than gold to those who wish to keep them hidden." Joan shivered, pulling her shawl closer. "You make it sound so sinister, Aunt Jane." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her eyes were sharp. "Sinister? Perhaps, but human, most certainly, and in my experience there's nothing more revealing than human nature under pressure." as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple, sat by the window, her knitting a steady rhythm in the quiet. The post office, with its missing letter, was only the beginning, she knew. Somewhere in the village, someone was holding a secret, and she would find it, not with force, but with the quiet, relentless logic of observation. For in St. Mary Mead, as in all small places, the truth was never far from the surface, if one only knew where to look. Chapter 2. The Suspects Emerge. The morning mist had barely lifted from St. Mary Mead when the village's collective imagination seized upon the mystery of the missing letter. By noon, the post office, with its unassuming facade and jingling bell, had become a stage for whispered theories and pointed glances. The air was thick with speculation, and the villagers, ever eager for a drama to punctuate their orderly lives, had already begun to cast their neighbors in roles of villainy. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat tilted against the autumn sun, walked slowly along the high street, her eyes taking in the familiar rhythm of the village, the clatter of a delivery bicycle, the chatter spilling from the tea shop, the occasional nod from a passer-by. Yet beneath this placid surface she sensed a current of unease, as though the theft had stirred something deeper, something hidden in the hearts of St. Mary Mead's inhabitants. At her niece Joan's cottage, Miss Marple settled into her usual armchair, her knitting a soft counterpoint to the ticking of the mantel clock. Joan, who had been out sketching the churchyard, burst through the door, her cheeks flushed with the cold, and her scarf trailing behind her. "Aunt Jane, it's all anyone can talk about," she exclaimed, tossing her sketch-pad onto the table. "The missing letter, everyone's got a theory. Mrs. Price swears it's young Tommy Bates, says he's been acting shifty. And Mr. Cleary from the pub thinks it's Mrs. Wilkins, what with her debts and all. Oh, and Mrs. Hargrove's been storming about, threatening to sue the post office." Miss Marple's needles paused, her expression one of mild curiosity. "Dear me, such a fuss. And what do you think, Joan? You've a good eye for people?" Joan laughed, shaking her head. "Me? I haven't a clue. But it's exciting, isn't it? Like something out of one of your detective stories." "Not my stories, dear," Miss Marple corrected gently, her eyes twinkling. "But life does have a way of imitating them. Now tell me, what exactly are they saying about young Tommy and Mrs. Wilkins?" Joan perched on the edge of a chair, her enthusiasm undimmed. "Well, Tommy's the clerk, you know. Barely 20, always talking about moving to London to make something of himself. Mrs. Price says she saw him counting coins in the shop last week, looking worried, like he was short. And then there's Mrs. Wilkins. Everyone knows she and Mr. Wilkins are struggling. They say she's been seen at the betting shop in Radford, and not just for a flutter. People are saying she might have taken the letter to sell it, or maybe to blackmail Mrs. Hargrove." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers resuming their steady rhythm. "Blackmail is a strong word, Joan. It implies knowledge, and knowledge implies a secret worth keeping. What of Mrs. Hargrove herself? Has anyone mentioned her role in this?" "Oh, she's the talk of the village," Joan replied. "They say she's been at Hargrove Hall all morning, pacing like a caged lion. Apparently, she's convinced the letter holds details of a fortune, stocks, bonds, maybe even a property abroad. but no one knows for sure because she's so tight-lipped about her affairs. And then there's Dr. Croft. Did you know he was at the post office yesterday? Mrs. Bantry mentioned it, said he looked awfully serious, posting a letter of his own. Dr. Croft, Miss Marple murmured, her tone thoughtful. Yes, I recall Mrs. Bantry mentioning him. A man of few words, I understand. And yet, so often, it's the quiet ones who bear watching. Joan tilted her head, studying her aunt. You're already thinking something, aren't you? I can tell by that look. Miss Marple smiled, a faint, enigmatic curve of her lips. I'm merely observing, dear. In a village like this, everyone knows everyone else's business, or thinks they do, but it's the things they don't know, the little omissions, that often matter most. Determined to see the post office for herself again, Miss Marple set out after lunch, her parcel from the previous day tucked under her arm as a pretext for another visit. The high street was quieter now, the morning's excitement having settled into a low hum of gossip. As she approached the post office, she saw Constable Polk, a ruddy-faced man with a slow, deliberate manner, standing outside, notebook in hand. He tipped his hat to her, his expression one of mild exasperation. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," he said. "Come to see the scene of the crime, have you?" "Oh, I wouldn't call it a crime just yet, Constable," she replied, her voice light. "A misplacement, perhaps." "These things do happen," Polk snorted. "Misplacement? That's what Wilkins keeps saying, but Mrs. Hargrove's calling it theft, and she's got half the village believing it. I've questioned young Tommy and Mr. Wilkins, but they're sticking to their story, locked up tight, no sign of trouble. I'm inclined to think it's just carelessness, but I've got to make a show of looking into it." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. "Of course, Constable. Duty must be done. Have you spoken to Mrs. Wilkins yet? Or Dr. Croft, perhaps?" Polk scratched his head. "Mrs. Wilkins is at home, feeling poorly, or so her husband says. And Dr. Croft, well, he confirmed he was here yesterday, posting a letter to a colleague in London. Nothing out of the ordinary, he says, but I'll keep asking around. Can't have Mrs. Hargrove stirring up more trouble than we need." Inside the post office, the atmosphere was tense. Harold Wilkins stood behind the counter, his eyes red-rimmed as though he hadn't slept. Tommy Bates was sorting letters with a sullen air, his usual cheer replaced by a defensive hunch of his shoulders. The bell jingled as Miss Marple entered, and both men looked up, their expressions wary. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," she said, placing her parcel on the counter. "I thought I'd post this to my friend in Devon. Such a reliable service you run here, mister. Wilkins, despite recent difficulties." Wilkins managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Miss Marple. It's been a trying day, I'll admit. I still can't fathom how that letter went missing. I checked the table myself last night, and it was there, addressed to Mrs. Hargrove, with a London postmark. I'd stake my job on it," Tommy muttered under his breath. "You might yet, sir." Wilkins shot him a sharp look. "That's enough, Tommy. We're all under strain, but there's no call for that." Miss Marple's eyes flickered between them, noting the tension. "It must be very distressing," she said kindly. "A letter of such importance, gone without a trace. Have you any theories, mister? Wilkins?" The postmaster hesitated, his fingers twisting a pencil. "I don't like to point fingers, Miss Marple, but, well, It's no secret my wife and I have had our troubles. She was here late yesterday, helping with the sorting. I don't think she'd do anything dishonest, mind you, but she's been worried about money lately. And Tommy here—" He stopped, glancing at the young man. Tommy's face reddened. "Don't you start on me, mister." "Wilkins, I didn't touch that letter. I locked the door, checked the windows, everything. You saw me." "I'm sure you did your best, Tommy," Miss Marple said soothingly. "But it's curious, isn't it? A locked door, no sign of a break-in, and yet the letter is gone. It does make one wonder if someone had a key, perhaps." Wilkins paled slightly, touching the brass key on the counter. "The spare's right here, Miss Marple. Never leaves my sight, and the main key's always with me or Tommy." "Of course," she said, her tone reassuring. "I'm sure it's all quite straightforward." These things often are, in the end. As she left the post office, Miss Marple paused outside, her gaze lingering on the door. The lock was sturdy, the frame solid, but she noted a faint scratch near the keyhole, barely visible unless one looked closely. "Interesting," she murmured to herself, filing the detail away. Her walk took her past the village tea shop, where she decided to stop for a cup of Earl Grey. The shop was a hub of activity, with tables crowded and voices overlapping. At one table she overheard Mrs. Price, the baker's wife, holding court with a group of women. "It's that Tommy Bates, mark my words," Mrs. Price declared, her voice carrying. "Always dreamin' of the city, that one. I saw him last week, counting his coins like he was desperate. Probably thought he could sell that letter for a tidy sum." Another woman, Mrs. Cleary from the pub, leaned in. "I'm not so sure." "What about Mrs. Wilkins? Everyone knows she's been at the betting shop. My cousin in Radford saw her there, spending more than she ought. Maybe she thought Mrs. Hargrove's letter was her ticket out of debt." Miss Marple sipped her tea, listening without appearing to. She noted the eagerness in their voices, the way suspicion fed on itself, growing wilder with each retelling. It reminded her of a case in her own village years ago, when a stolen brooch had set neighbor against neighbor, only to be found in a magpie's nest. People do love a scapegoat, she thought, her lips curving slightly. As she left the tea shop, she encountered Dr. Elias Croft, striding down the street with his black medical bag. He was a tall man in his late 40s, with a lean face and eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. He tipped his hat to her, his expression polite but distant. "Good afternoon, Doctor." "Croft," Miss Marple said, pausing. "I hear you were at the post office yesterday. Such a curious business, this missing letter." Croft's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice was steady. "Indeed, Miss Marple. I posted a letter to a colleague, nothing more. I'm as puzzled as anyone about Mrs. Hargrove's letter. A shame, really. Such things disrupt the village." "Yes, they do," she agreed. "But disruptions can be so illuminating, don't you think?" He gave her a sharp look, then nodded curtly and continued on his way. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind turning over his reserve, his careful words. A man who chooses his words as carefully as a surgeon chooses his scalpel, she thought. But why? Back at Joan's cottage, the evening settled in with a chill, and Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting a steady companion. Joan, restless, paced the room. "Aunt Jane, do you really think it's one of them? Tommy, Mrs. Wilkins, maybe even Dr. Croft?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "I think, Joan, that everyone has a story, and stories have layers. Tommy's ambition, Mrs. Wilkins's debts, Doctor. Croft's reticence, they're all threads in the same tapestry. But there's another thread, one we haven't seen yet, and that, my dear, is what makes a mystery. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to Mrs. Hargrove, whose anger had seemed so fierce, yet so calculated. She thought of the scratch on the lock, the spare key on the counter, the whispers of money and secrets. And she wondered, not for the first time, if the letter's disappearance was less about theft and more about what it might reveal or conceal. In St. Mary Mead, as in all small places, the truth was often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with the patience to see it. Chapter 3. The First Clue. The sun rose over St. Mary Mead with a pale, reluctant light, as though hesitant to illuminate the growing unease that had settled over the village. The missing letter, now 2 days gone, had woven itself into the fabric of daily life, its absence a constant topic in every shop, lane, and fireside. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, sat at Joan's breakfast table, her knitting resting beside a half-eaten scone. The Morning Post had brought no news, only bills, and a letter from a distant cousin, but Joan's chatter filled the room with the village's latest theories. "Aunt Jane, they're saying it must be an inside job," Joan said, pouring tea with a flourish. "Mrs. Cleary swears she saw Tommy Bates lingering near the post office after hours, though she's not sure it was him, and Mrs. Price says Mrs. Wilkins was seen in Radford again at that betting shop. Oh, and Mrs. Hargrove's been to the post office twice already, demanding action. She's threatening to call in Scotland Yard." Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, betrayed a flicker of amusement. "Scotland Yard, indeed," she murmured. "Mrs. Hargrove does seem rather fond of drama, but gossip, Joan, is like a fog. It obscures as much as it reveals. Tell me, has anyone mentioned anything new about the letter itself?" Joan frowned, stirring her tea. "Not much, except that it's definitely from London. Mr. Wilkins mentioned a postmark, didn't he? And everyone's still saying it's about an inheritance. But no one knows for sure, because Mrs. Hargrove won't say a word about what was in it. She just keeps shouting about her rights." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of her saucer. "A letter from London, with a postmark. That's something, at least. And yet, it's the absence of details that intrigues me most. People are so quick to fill silence with their own stories." Determined to see for herself, Miss Marple set out for the post office after breakfast, her steps measured but purposeful. The village was awake now, its rhythms familiar, yet tinged with a subtle tension. A group of children played near the church, their laughter a counterpoint to the hushed conversations of their elders. As she approached the post office, she saw Constable Polk emerging, his notebook tucked under his arm, and his expression one of dogged determination. "Good morning, Constable," Miss Marple said, pausing to adjust her hat. "Any progress on our little mystery?" Polk sighed, rubbing his jaw. "Morning, Miss Marple." "Not much, I'm afraid. I've been over the place again, and there's no sign of a break-in. The door's got a scratch or two, mind you, but nothing forced. Wilkins is sticking to his story, locked up tight. Letter on the table. Tommy says the same. I'm starting to think it was mislaid, but Mrs. Hargrove won't hear of it." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "A scratch on the door, you say? That's curious. And no other clues?" Polk hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Well, there was one thing. Found a bit of torn envelope under the counter this morning, just a corner, with a smudge of ink and a London postmark. Could be from Mrs. Hargrove's letter, but it's not much to go on. I've bagged it for evidence, though I doubt it'll help." "A torn corner," Miss Marple repeated softly. "How very interesting. May I see it, Constable?" Polk, accustomed to her gentle but persistent curiosity, produced a small paper bag from his pocket. Inside was a scrap of cream-colored envelope, no larger than a postage stamp, with a faint postmark and a smudge of blue ink. Miss Marple examined it closely, her fingers delicate as she turned it in the light. "Such a small thing," she said, almost to herself. "And yet, small things can tell such stories." "Thank you." Constable Polk tipped his hat and moved on, leaving Miss Marple to enter the post office. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of paper and wax, and the counter was cluttered with the morning's mail. Harold Wilkins stood behind it, his face drawn, while Tommy Bates sorted letters with a mechanical air. The bell's chime announced her arrival, and both men looked up, their expressions a mix of weariness and wariness. "Good morning, mister." "Wilkins, Tommy?" Miss Marple said brightly, producing a small envelope from her bag. "I've a letter to post to my friend in Bath." "Such a reliable service you provide, despite recent troubles." Wilkins managed a strained smile. "Thank you, Miss Marple. It's been a trial, I won't lie. That letter, Mrs. Hargrove's, she's been in again, shouting about lawsuits. I can't make head nor tail of it. The door was locked, the windows secure. It's like a ghost took it." Tommy muttered, "Ghosts don't steal letters." Someone did. Miss Marple's eyes flickered to him, noting the edge in his voice. "You sound quite certain, Tommy. Have you any thoughts on who that someone might be?" Tommy flushed, his hands pausing over the letters. "I didn't mean nothing by it, Miss Marple. Just that it's not right, everyone pointing fingers at me. I locked up proper, like I said. Ask Mr. Wilkins." "I don't doubt you, Tommy," she replied gently. "But it's curious, isn't it? A letter vanishes from a locked room. It does make one wonder about keys, or perhaps someone who knows the post office's habits well." Wilkins coughed, his fingers fidgeting with a stamp. "The spare key's right here, Miss Marple, same as always. And only Tommy and I have access to the main one. I can't see how anyone got in." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "But human nature is so inventive, isn't it? People find ways to do the most surprising things." As she left the post office, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the torn envelope corner. It was a clue, certainly, but a fragile one, like a single thread in a tangled skein. She decided to take a detour through the village, her path leading her past the tea shop, where she spotted Lily Carter, Tommy's sweetheart, sitting alone at a table near the window. Lily, a pretty girl of 19 with auburn hair and a worried expression, was stirring her tea absently, her eyes distant. Miss Marple, ever adept at seizing opportunities, entered the shop and approached her table. "Good morning, Lily," she said, her voice warm. "May I join you for a moment? These old legs do appreciate a rest." Lily started, then nodded. "Of course, Miss Marple. It's nice to see you." They exchanged pleasantries, but Miss Marple, with her knack for drawing out confidences, soon steered the conversation to the post office. "Such a troubling business, this missing letter," she said, sipping her tea. "Poor Tommy must be feeling the strain." Lily's eyes filled with tears, and she set her spoon down with a clatter. "It's awful, Miss Marple. Everyone's saying it's him, but I know Tommy wouldn't steal. He's got dreams, yes, but he's honest. Only—" She hesitated, biting her lip. "Only what, my dear?" Miss Marple prompted gently, her tone that of a kindly aunt. Lily glanced around, then leaned closer. "He's been worried lately. About money, I mean. We want to get married, move to London, but it's so expensive. He's been saving, but it's never enough. I told him we could wait, but he's so determined." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic. "Young love is so impatient, isn't it? But worries can lead to desperate acts, Lily. Has Tommy mentioned anything about the letter?" Lily shook her head fiercely. "No, never. He says he doesn't know what happened, and I believe him. He was home with his mum that night, like he told the constable. Oh, Miss Marple, I just want this to be over." "There, there," Miss Marple said, patting her hand. "Truth has a way of coming out, my dear. Like a stubborn weed, it pushes through the cracks." As she left the tea shop, Miss Marple's mind was busy. Lily's devotion was touching, but devotion could blind as well as bind. Tommy's financial worries were a thread worth following, but so too was the torn envelope corner with its smudged ink and London postmark. And then there was the scratch on the door, a detail that nagged at her like a dropped stitch. Her walk took her past Hargrove Hall, the imposing Georgian manor where Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove resided. The wrought-iron gates were closed, but through them Miss Marple glimpsed the widow pacing the gravel drive, her black dress stark against the autumn leaves. Even from a distance, her agitation was palpable, her hands gesturing as she spoke to a maid, who scurried away with a frightened look. Miss Marple paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. Such a performance, she thought, but for whose benefit? That evening, as she sat by Joan's fire, a new development reached her ears. Joan, who had been visiting Mrs. Bantry, returned with a breathless report. "Aunt Jane, you'll never believe it. Mrs. Hargrove got a note this afternoon, slipped under her door. It says the letter's safe, but she'll have to pay to get it back. £500, can you imagine? It's blackmail." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. "Blackmail," she said softly. "Now that is a development. Did the note say anything else?" Joan shook her head. "Not that Mrs. Bantry heard, but Mrs. Hargrove's in a state, says she'll pay if it means getting the letter back. Constable Polk's been called, but he's not sure what to make of it." Miss Marple leaned back, her mind turning over the new piece of the puzzle. A ransom note suggested calculation, perhaps desperation, but also knowledge. Knowledge of the letter's value, or at least its perceived value. She thought of Tommy's dreams, Mrs. Wilkins' debts, Dr. Croft's reticence, and Mrs. Hargrove's theatrics, and she thought of the torn envelope corner, a small, silent witness to the truth. "Blackmail is a dangerous game, Joan," she said at last, her voice calm but firm. "It requires a certain boldness, but also a certain blindness. Whoever wrote that note believes they're in control, but they may have underestimated Saint. Mary Mead." Joan shivered, pulling her shawl closer. "You make it sound so ominous, Aunt Jane." Miss Marple smiled, her needles resuming their rhythm. "Not ominous, dear. Merely human. And in my experience, it's the human element that unravels even the cleverest schemes." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts wove a pattern of their own, each clue a thread each suspect a knot. The torn envelope, the scratched lock, the ransom note. They were fragments of a larger picture, one that was slowly taking shape in her mind. In St. Mary Mead, secrets were never buried deep, and Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, was determined to unearth them. Chapter 4. Shadows of Doubt. The autumn chill deepened in St. Mary Mead, wrapping the village in a shroud of mist that clung to the hedgerows and muffled the clatter of morning deliveries. The mystery of the missing letter, now 3 days old, had grown into a living thing, fed by whispers and nurtured by suspicion. The post office, once a place of mundane transactions, had become a focal point of intrigue, its every creak and shadow scrutinized by villagers eager for answers. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl drawn tightly against the damp, sat at Joan's breakfast table, her knitting idle as she sipped tea and listened to her niece's latest report. "Aunt Jane, it's getting worse," Joan said, her eyes bright with the thrill of village drama. "Mrs. Hargrove's been to the post office again, demanding to see Constable Paulk's notes. She says she won't rest until the letter's found or someone's in jail. And there's talk about Dr. Croft now. Mrs. Cleary swears she saw him lingering near the post office the evening the letter went missing, though she admits it was dark. Oh, and they're saying Mrs. Wilkins has been acting strange, staying indoors all day. People are starting to think she's guilty." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "Guilt is a heavy word, Joan. It's thrown about so easily, like confetti, but it sticks where it lands. What exactly do they say about Dr. Croft?" Joan leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Well, it's mostly gossip, but Mrs. Cleary says he's got a past, something about a scandal in London years ago. No one knows the details, but they're saying he might have taken the letter to protect himself, or maybe to sell it. And then there's Mrs. Wilkins. They say she's been avoiding everyone, and Mr. Cleary heard she's been to see Dr. Croft for nerves. People are whispering it's more than just doctor visits, if you catch my meaning." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. "An affair, Joan? How very imaginative. Gossip does love to weave a scandal where none may exist. But nerves, now, that's interesting. Worry can make people do the most unexpected things." Determined to sift through the village's tangled tales, Miss Marple set out after breakfast, her umbrella tucked under her arm as a precaution against the drizzle. The high street was quiet, the mist lending an air of secrecy to the familiar shops and cottages. As she approached the post office, she saw Harold Wilkins outside, speaking in low tones to Constable Paulk. The postmaster's hands were clasped tightly, his face pale and drawn, as though the weight of the mystery had settled squarely on his shoulders. "Good morning, Mr. Wilkins, Constable," Miss Marple said, her voice bright despite the gloom. "Such a damp day, isn't it? I thought I'd pop in to check on a parcel I sent. Any news on Mrs. Hargrove's letter?" Wilkins started, his eyes darting to Paulk before he answered. "Nothing new, Miss Marple. I've gone over every inch of this place, but it's gone. I can't sleep for worrying about it. My reputation, 30 years in the service, and now this." Paulk nodded, his expression one of weary patience. "We're doing all we can, Miss Marple. That torn envelope corner's the only lead, but it's not much. I've questioned everyone who was here that day, Wilkins, Tommy, even Dr. Croft. No one saw anything out of the ordinary. Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze resting on Wilkins. "You've had quite a shock, Mr. Wilkins. It must be difficult, managing under such scrutiny. I understand Mrs. Wilkins has been unwell." Wilkins flushed, his hands twisting together. "Yes, she's been under the weather. The strain, you know. She's not used to all this talk. She was here that evening, helping with the sorting, but she left before we locked up. I don't know what people are saying, but she's done nothing wrong." "Of course," Miss Marple said soothingly. "It's only natural for tongues to wag. But you've been most thorough, I'm sure. And Dr. Croft, he was here too, wasn't he?" Paulk nodded. "Aye, he was. Posted a letter like he said. I asked him about it, and he was cooperative enough, but he's not one for chatter. Said it was a professional matter, nothing to do with Mrs. Hargrove." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Doctors do value their privacy, don't they? Well, I shan't keep you. I'll just pop inside." The post office was quieter than usual, with only Tommy Bates behind the counter, his face set in a scowl as he sorted letters. The bell's chime seemed to startle him, and he looked up, his eyes narrowing briefly before softening at the sight of Miss Marple. "Good morning, Tommy," she said, placing her umbrella in the stand. "You're managing bravely, I see, with all this fuss." Tommy shrugged, his hands moving mechanically. "Trying to, Miss Marple. But it's not easy with everyone thinking I'm a thief. I didn't take that letter, I swear it. I locked up, checked everything, like always." "I don't doubt your diligence, Tommy," she replied, her tone kind but probing. "But it's curious, isn't it? A letter vanishes, and no one sees a thing. Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Perhaps someone lingering near the post office after hours?" Tommy hesitated, his eyes flicking to the door. "Well, I don't like to say, but there was one thing. The evening it happened, I saw Dr. Croft walking by, just as I was locking up. He didn't come in, mind you, just passed by, but he looked, I don't know, odd, like he was checking something." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly. "How interesting. And you're sure it was Dr. Croft?" Tommy nodded, then added quickly, "But it could have been nothing. I mean, he's always about, isn't he? Being the doctor and all." "Of course," she said, her smile reassuring. "These things often seem more significant than they are." "Thank you, Tommy." As she left the post office, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Dr. Elias Croft. His presence near the post office, his reticence, the whispers of a London scandal. They were pieces of a puzzle, though whether they fit was another matter. She decided to pay a visit to the tea shop, hoping to catch more of the village's pulse. Inside, the air was warm and fragrant with scones and tea. Mrs. Price, the baker's wife, was at her usual table, surrounded by a small knot of women. Their voices dropped as Miss Marple entered, but she caught fragments of their talk. Dr. Croft's name, Mrs. Wilkins' absence, and the ever-present spectre of Mrs. Hargrove's wrath. Miss Marple took a seat near the window, ordering a pot of tea and a slice of Victoria sponge. As she waited, she overheard Mrs. Price's voice, sharp with conviction. "I'm telling you, it's that doctor. Croft. Why is he so secretive? My cousin in London says he was mixed up in some trouble years ago. A patient died, and there was talk of negligence. Maybe that letter had something on him." Another woman, Mrs. Tuttle, shook her head. "I say it's Mrs. Wilkins. She's been acting guilty, hiding away like that, and everyone knows she's been to Dr. Croft for pills. What if they're in it together? Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression serene, but her mind alert. The mention of Dr. Croft and Mrs. Wilkins together was new, a thread worth tugging. She recalled a case in her own village years ago, when a rumor of an affair had masked a simpler truth, a debt, not a dalliance. People do love a scandal, she thought, but it's the quieter motives that often matter. Her musings were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Croft himself, who entered the tea shop with his usual brisk stride. He nodded politely to Miss Marple, then took a table in the corner, his black bag at his feet. The room's chatter faltered briefly, then resumed with a renewed edge. Miss Marple, seizing the moment, approached his table with her teapot in hand. "Dr. Croft, how fortunate to see you," she said, her voice warm. "May I join you for a moment?" "These old bones do appreciate a rest." Croft looked up, his expression guarded but courteous. "Of course, Miss Marple. Please, sit." They exchanged pleasantries, but Miss Marple, with her knack for gentle probing, soon turned the conversation to the post office. "Such a troubling business, this missing letter," she said. "I hear you were there that evening." "It must be unsettling." With all this talk, Croft's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "It's nonsense, Miss Marple. I posted a letter to a colleague, as I told the constable. I've no interest in Mrs. Hargrove's affairs, or anyone else's. I'm a doctor, not a thief." "Of course," she said, her smile disarming. "But villages do talk, don't they? I heard a whisper about a scandal in London, such a long time ago. I'm sure it's nothing." Croft's eyes flashed, and for a moment his composure slipped. "Nonsense," he snapped. "I'm a professional, Miss Marple. My past has no bearing on this. People will say anything to stir up trouble." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged. "Oh, indeed, Doctor. Croft gossip is so often just noise, but it does make one wonder what the letter contained to cause such a stir." Croft stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "I've patients to see, Miss Marple. Good day." As he left, the tea shop buzzed anew, and Miss Marple returned to her table, her mind weaving connections. Croft's defensiveness was telling, but so was his haste to dismiss the past. She thought of Mrs. Wilkins, absent and rumored to be unwell, and of Tommy's mention of Croft near the post office. And then there was the torn envelope corner, its smudged ink a silent clue. Back at Joan's cottage, the evening brought a visitor, Mrs. Clara Bantry, her face alight with news. "Miss Marple, you'll never guess. They've found something at the post office, a hairpin under the sorting table. Mrs. Price says it's Mrs. Wilkins, says she's always wearing them. It's got everyone thinking she's the one." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. "A hairpin," she said. "How very convenient." "But clues, Mrs. Bantry, are like breadcrumbs. Sometimes they lead to the truth, and sometimes they're scattered to mislead." Joan, curled up on the sofa, looked puzzled. "You think it's a red herring, Aunt Jane?" "I think," Miss Marple replied, "that someone wants us to look one way while the truth lies elsewhere. But patience, my dears. The shadows are lengthening, and with them the truth will come." As the fire cast flickering shadows on the walls, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the web of doubt that had enveloped Saint. Mary Mead, the hairpin, the torn envelope, the ransom note, they were pieces of a larger pattern, one she was beginning to discern. In a village where everyone watched everyone else, the truth was never far from sight, if one only knew how to look. Chapter 5. The Ransom Demand. The mist that had cloaked Saint. Mary Mead for days lifted briefly on the fourth morning, revealing a sky of uncertain blue and a village humming with restless energy. The mystery of Mrs. Hargrove's missing letter had taken firm root, its tendrils curling through every conversation, from the butcher's counter to the church pews. The discovery of the hairpin had only fueled the fire, with fingers pointing ever more sharply at Mrs. Wilkins, whose absence from public view was now the subject of fevered speculation. Miss Jane Marple, seated at Joan's dining table with her knitting in hand, listened as her niece recounted the latest village talk, her needles clicking in a rhythm as steady as her thoughts. "Aunt Jane, it's all anyone can talk about," Joan said, slicing a loaf of bread with rather more force than necessary. "That hairpin's got everyone convinced, Mrs. Wilkins is guilty. Mrs. Price says she saw her wearing one just like it last week, and now people are saying she must have dropped it while stealing the letter. But the big news is Mrs. Hargrove. She's had another note. It was slipped under her door last night, demanding £500 for the letter's return. Can you believe it? It's like something out of a penny dreadful." Miss Marple's eyes, bright behind her spectacles, flickered with interest. £500, she murmured, her needles pausing for a moment. A considerable sum, and yet so precise. "Did the note say anything else, Joan?" Joan shook her head, spreading butter with a flourish. "Not much, from what Mrs. Bantry told me. Just that the letter's safe, and she's to leave the money in the churchyard at midnight tonight, under the yew tree. No signature, no clues, just a typed note, bold as brass. Mrs. Hargrove's in a state, says she'll pay if it means getting the letter back, but she's demanding Constable Polk set a trap." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "A trap, you say? That could be interesting. Blackmail is such a reckless game, Joan. It requires nerve, but also a certain blindness to risk. Whoever wrote that note believes they hold the upper hand, but they may not see the net closing around them." Joan paused, her knife hovering over the bread. "You think it's a bluff, Aunt Jane? Or that someone's watching Mrs. Hargrove?" "I think," Miss Marple replied, her voice soft but certain, "that secrets have a way of drawing attention to themselves, and in a village like this, attention is never far away." Determined to learn more, Miss Marple set out for the village after breakfast, her umbrella tucked under her arm as a precaution against the fickle weather. The high street was alive with its usual bustle, but the air carried a charge of anticipation, as though the village itself were holding its breath. As she approached the churchyard, she saw Constable Polk conferring with Mr. Cleary, the publican, near the lich gate. Polk's face was set in a frown, his notebook open but neglected. "Good morning, Constable," Miss Marple said, pausing to adjust her hat. "I hear there's been another development in our little mystery. A ransom note, no less." Polk sighed, tucking his pencil behind his ear. "Morning, Miss Marple." "Aye, it's a right mess. Mrs. Hargrove brought the note to me this morning. Typed, no handwriting, just like Joan said. £500 to be left under the yew tree at midnight. I'm planning to watch the spot tonight, see if anyone turns up. But between you and me, I'm not hopeful. Whoever's behind this is clever enough to cover their tracks." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to the ancient yew tree, its gnarled branches casting long shadows across the graves. "A clever choice, the churchyard," she said. "Quiet, secluded, but not without its risks. Have you shown the note to Mr. Wilkins or Tommy?" Paulk shook his head. "Not yet. Mrs. Hargrove's keeping it close, says she doesn't trust anyone at the post office. I'll show it to them later, see if it jogs anything. But that hairpin's got everyone talking about Mrs. Wilkins. I went to see her this morning, but she's still poorly, won't leave her bed." "Poorly," Miss Marple repeated, her tone thoughtful, "or perhaps avoiding scrutiny. Illness can be such a convenient shield, can't it?" Paulk gave her a curious look, but said nothing, and Miss Marple continued on her way, her steps leading her to Hargrove Hall. The manor's gates were open today, and she glimpsed Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove in the garden, speaking sharply to her gardener, who was raking leaves with a chastened air. Miss Marple, never one to miss an opportunity, approached with a polite smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Hargrove," she called, pausing at the gate. "I hope I'm not intruding. I heard about the ransom note. What a dreadful business." Mrs. Hargrove turned, her face a mask of controlled fury. "Miss Marple, isn't it? You're Joan West's aunt. Yes, it's dreadful, and worse. It's an outrage. £500, as if I were some common mark. That letter contains my future, and I'll not be toyed with by thieves and blackmailers." Miss Marple's expression was one of gentle sympathy. "Of course, it must be terribly upsetting. May I ask what the letter contained? It might help to know what's at stake." Mrs. Hargrove's eyes narrowed, but she relented slightly, her voice dropping. "It's from my late husband's solicitor, as I've said. Details of an inheritance, stocks, bonds, perhaps more. But it's private, Miss Marple, and I'll not have it bandied about. The note says it's safe, but I must pay to get it back. I've told Paulk to watch the churchyard tonight, but I'm not hopeful. Whoever took it knows too much." Miss Marple nodded, her mind noting the careful vagueness of Mrs. Hargrove's words. "It does sound like someone with knowledge," she said. "Perhaps someone close to the post office, or even to you." Mrs. Hargrove stiffened, her lips thinning. "I've no idea who it could be, but I'll see them in chains before this is over. Good day, Miss Marple." As she walked away, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the note's precision, typed anonymous, demanding a specific sum. It suggested planning, but also audacity, and she wondered who in St. Mary Mead possessed both. Her next stop was the tea shop, where she hoped to glean more from the village's ever-churning rumor mill. Inside, the air was warm and fragrant, and the tables were crowded with familiar faces. Mrs. Price, as ever, held court, her voice carrying over the clink of teacups. "It's Mrs. Wilkins, I'm telling you," she declared. "That hairpin's proof enough, and now this ransom note? She's desperate for money, everyone knows it. Why else would she hide away?" Mrs. Tuttle, stirring her tea, leaned in. "But what about young Tommy? I heard him talking to Lily at the shop yesterday, sounding worried. Said something about needing money for their future. Maybe he thought he could sell the letter." Miss Marple, seated nearby with her tea and a scone, listened without appearing to. The mention of Tommy caught her attention, and she recalled Lily's tearful defense of him. Deciding to pursue this thread, she finished her tea and made her way to the village shop where Lily Carter worked behind the counter. The shop was quiet, and Lily looked up with a weary smile as Miss Marple entered. "Hello, Miss Marple. Just some stamps today?" "Perhaps in a moment, dear," Miss Marple said, her tone warm. "I was hoping to have a word. This business with the letter must be so hard for you, with Tommy under suspicion." Lily's face clouded, and she set down the pencil she'd been holding. "It's awful, Miss Marple. Everyone's saying it's him or Mrs. Wilkins, but Tommy wouldn't do it. He was home that night, like he said. But—" She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I heard him talking to someone yesterday outside the shop. It was quick, but he sounded scared, said something about needing money fast. I don't know who it was. Too far to see." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was sharp. "Money can be such a burden, can't it? But you mustn't worry too much, Lily. The truth has a way of surfacing, like a cork in water." As she left the shop, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the ransom note. Its arrival suggested a new phase in the mystery, one where the thief, or blackmailer, was growing bolder. She decided to visit the churchyard, curious about the chosen drop point. The yew tree, ancient and sprawling, stood in a quiet corner, its branches heavy with shadow. She examined the ground beneath it, noting the soft earth undisturbed by footprints. A clever choice, she thought, but a risky one. That evening, back at Joan's cottage, Mrs. Bantry arrived with fresh news. "Miss Marple, the trap's set. Paul's got 2 men watching the churchyard tonight, hidden in the shrubs. Mrs. Hargroves agreed to leave a dummy package, just paper, mind you, to see who comes. Oh, it's like a detective novel." Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking steadily. "A trap is only as good as the bait, Mrs. Bantry, and I suspect our blackmailer is no fool. But it will be interesting to see what happens." As midnight approached, Constable Paulk and his men waited in the churchyard, their breath visible in the cold night air. The yew tree loomed silently, the dummy package tucked beneath its roots. Hours passed, but no one came. The trap, so carefully set, yielded nothing but the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. By morning, the village buzzed with disappointment, and Miss Marple, hearing the news from Joan, sat thoughtfully by the fire. "No one came," she said, her voice soft. "How very telling. Either our blackmailer is cautious, or they knew it was a trap. Or perhaps, Joan, the note was never meant to be acted upon." Joan frowned, puzzled. "You mean it was a trick? But why?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "To distract, perhaps, or to test. In a village like this, every action leaves a trace, and every trace tells a story. We must simply keep looking." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's mind wove the threads together. The hairpin, the torn envelope, the ransom note, Tommy's whispered fears, Mrs. Wilkins' absence, Doctor Croft's defensiveness, and Mrs. Hargrove's carefully staged fury. The mystery was deepening, but so too was her certainty that the truth, like the yew tree's roots, was closer than anyone realized. Chapter 6. Hidden Motives. The 5th day in Saint. Merry Mead dawned with a brittle clarity, the sky a sharp blue that belied the undercurrent of suspicion weaving through the village. The failed trap in the churchyard had only deepened the mystery of the missing letter, and the villagers, thwarted in their hopes of a swift resolution, turned their scrutiny inward with renewed vigor. The post office, its brass bell now a harbinger of intrigue rather than routine, stood at the heart of the storm, its every occupant a potential culprit. Miss Jane Marple, seated in Joan's sitting room with her knitting in her lap, listened as her niece recounted the latest whispers, her needles moving with a rhythm as steady as her thoughts. "Aunt Jane, it's like the whole village has gone mad," Joan said, pacing the room with a cup of tea in hand. "Everyone's talking about the ransom note now and how no one showed up last night. Mrs. Price is convinced Mrs. Wilkins knew it was a trap. That's why she's still hiding away. And Mr. Cleary says he heard from a man in Radford that Mrs. Wilkins was at the casino there again, losing more than she could afford. Oh, and they're still whispering about Dr. Croft. Someone saw him burning papers in his garden yesterday evening. Can you imagine?" Miss Marple's eyes, bright and bird-like, flickered with interest. "Burning papers," she murmured, her needles pausing briefly. "How very curious. And Mrs. Wilkins gambling, has anyone confirmed it, or is it merely talk?" Joan shrugged, setting her cup down with a clink. "It's mostly talk, but Mr. Cleary's cousin works at the casino, and he says she's been there regularly, betting on cards and roulette. They say she owes a fair bit, and Mr. Wilkins doesn't know the half of it. As for Dr. Croft, no one's sure what he was burning, but it's got people thinking he's hiding something." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers resuming their work. "Debt and secrecy are powerful motives, Joan. They can drive people to desperate acts, or make them appear desperate when they're not. I recall a case in my village years ago, a shopkeeper accused of theft, all because he'd been seen counting his coins late at night. Turned out he was saving for his daughter's wedding, not stealing. Appearances can be so deceptive." Determined to unravel the tangle of motives, Miss Marple set out after breakfast, her shawl wrapped tightly against the morning chill. The high street was quieter than usual, as though the village were holding its breath, waiting for the next revelation. Her first stop was the post office, where she hoped to gauge the mood of its beleaguered staff. Inside, Harold Wilkins stood behind the counter, his face etched with exhaustion. Tommy Bates was absent, replaced by a temporary clerk from Radford, a dour young woman who sorted letters with mechanical precision. The bell's chime announced Miss Marple's arrival, and Wilkins looked up, his eyes weary but polite. "Good morning, mister." "Wilkins," Miss Marple said, producing a small parcel from her bag. "I thought I'd send this to my cousin in Devon." "You must be terribly busy with all this trouble." Wilkins managed a weak smile, his hands fidgeting with a stamp. "Busy's one word for it, Miss Marple. It's been a nightmare, if I'm honest. That ransom note, Mrs. Hargrove's blaming me, says I must have let someone in. But I swear the place was locked tight, and now with my wife feeling poorly, it's all too much." Miss Marple's expression was one of gentle sympathy. "It must be very trying, especially with Mrs. Wilkins unwell. I hear she's been under some strain. Financial worries, perhaps?" Wilkins flushed, his fingers tightening on the stamp. "People talk, don't they?" "Yes, we've had our troubles, but nothing out of the ordinary. Margaret's been to Radford a few times, likes a flutter now and then, but she'd never do anything dishonest. I told her to stay home today, rest up. All this gossip's making her worse." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. Gossip can be so cruel. And Tommy, where is he today? Wilkins hesitated, his eyes darting to the door. Called in sick, he did. Said he's got a cold, but between you and me, I think he's just fed up with the suspicion. Can't say I blame him. Miss Marple nodded, filing the information away. As she left the post office, her thoughts turned to Mrs. Wilkins' gambling and Tommy's sudden absence. Both were threads worth following, but so too was Dr. Croft's rumored paper burning. She decided to visit the doctor's surgery, hoping to catch him between patients. The surgery was a modest building on the edge of the village, its windows frosted for privacy. Miss Marple, claiming a minor ailment, was ushered into Dr. Croft's consulting room, where he sat at a cluttered desk, his black bag at his side. He rose as she entered, his lean face composed, but his eyes wary. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said, gesturing to a chair. "A touch of rheumatism, is it? Or something else?" Miss Marple smiled, settling into the chair with a slight wince for effect. "Just a twinge, Doctor." "Croft, nothing serious. But I confess I'm also curious about this business with the letter. The village is quite abuzz, and I hear you've been caught up in the talk." Croft's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Village gossip, Miss Marple. I've no time for it. I was at the post office that evening, as I've said, posting a letter to a colleague. As for burning papers, as I'm sure you've heard, it was just old medical records, nothing sinister. I'm a doctor, not a criminal." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone disarming. "But it's curious, isn't it? A letter vanishes, a ransom note appears, and now whispers of your past in London. I heard there was some trouble, a patient." "Perhaps?" Croft's eyes flashed, and for a moment his calm faltered. "That was years ago, Miss Marple, and long settled. A misdiagnosis, nothing more, blown out of proportion by busybodies. It has no bearing on this letter nonsense. I'd appreciate it if you'd stick to your rheumatism." Miss Marple nodded, her smile unchanged. "Oh, indeed, Doctor. Croft, I'm just an old woman with too much time on her hands. Thank you for seeing me." As she left the surgery, Miss Marple's mind was busy. Croft's defensiveness was telling, but so was his insistence on privacy. The burning of papers, even if innocent, suggested a man wary of scrutiny. She thought of Mrs. Wilkins' gambling, a motive that loomed large in the village's imagination, and of Tommy's absence, which could be illness or avoidance. And then there was Mrs. Hargrove, whose silence about the letter's contents was as loud as her public outrage. Her next stop was the village shop, where she hoped to find Lily Carter. The shop was busy, with customers exchanging hushed theories over baskets of apples and tins of tea. Lily stood behind the counter, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed, as though she hadn't slept. "Good morning, Lily," Miss Marple said, selecting a packet of biscuits. "You look tired, my dear. This business with the letter must be weighing on you." Lily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's awful, Miss Marple. Tommy's not himself. He didn't come to work today. Says he's sick. But I think it's the talk getting to him. I saw him yesterday, outside the shop, talking to someone in a hurry. He said it was nothing, but he looked scared. I don't know what to think." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was alert. "Fear can be a heavy burden, Lily. Did you see who he was talking to?" Lily shook her head. It was too far, and the mist was thick. but it was a man, I think, in a dark coat. Tommy said it was about work, but I don't believe him. Oh, Miss Marple, I just want him to be all right." "There, there," Miss Marple said, patting her hand. "The truth has a way of clearing the air, my dear. You must be brave for Tommy." As she left the shop, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the web of motives now emerging. Mrs. Wilkins's gambling debts suggested desperation, but her absence could be guilt or simply shame. Dr. Croft's past, though dismissed, hinted at secrets he wished to keep buried. Tommy's fear and absence pointed to pressure, perhaps from an outside source, and Mrs. Hargrove's refusal to disclose the letter's contents suggested a deeper stake in its loss. Back at Joan's cottage, the evening brought a visitor, Mrs. Clara Bantry, her face alight with fresh gossip. "Miss Marple, you'll never believe it. They're saying Mrs. Hargrove's letter wasn't just about money. It might have mentioned a family secret, something about her late husband's will. And there's talk of a nephew abroad, someone who'd lose out if the letter came to light." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. "A family secret," she said. "How very intriguing." "Secrets, Mrs. Bantry, are like shadows. They grow longer in the light of suspicion." Joan, curled up on the sofa, looked puzzled. "You think the letter's about more than money, Aunt Jane?" "I think," Miss Marple replied, "that money is often a mask for something deeper. Love, shame, fear. They're the currents that run beneath the surface, and in St. Mary Mead, those currents are never far from sight." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's mind wove the threads together. The hairpin, the torn envelope, the ransom note, Tommy's fear, Mrs. Wilkins's debts, Dr. Croft's past, and Mrs. Hargrove's guarded silence. The mystery was a tapestry of hidden motives, and she was determined to find the pattern that would reveal the truth. Chapter 7. Alliances and Alibis. The 6th day in St. Mary Mead brought a restless wind that rattled the shutters and stirred the fallen leaves into restless eddies along the lanes. The mystery of the missing letter, now a week old, had settled into the village's bones, its unresolved threads tightening the web of suspicion that bound its inhabitants. The failed ransom trap in the churchyard had left the villagers grasping for new theories, and the post office, once a place of quiet routine, now seemed a stage where every glance and gesture was scrutinized. Miss Jane Marple, seated in Joan's cozy sitting room with her knitting in hand, listened as her niece recounted the morning's gossip, her needles moving with a calm precision that belied the quickness of her thoughts. "Aunt Jane, it's like a storm brewing," Joan said, setting a tray of tea and biscuits on the table. "Everyone's talking about Tommy now. Mrs. Price says she saw him arguing with Lily yesterday, near the shop, and he looked desperate. And there's more about Mrs. Wilkins. Mr. Cleary says she was seen slipping out of her house late last night, though no one knows where she went. Oh, and Mrs. Hargrove's been to the vicarage, asking the vicar to pray for her stolen legacy. Can you believe it?" Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, flickered with interest. "Prayer is a great comfort, Joan, but it's curious how often it's sought in the wake of drama. What do they say about Tommy's argument with Lily?" Joan poured the tea, her brow furrowed. "Mrs. Price says it was heated, something about money, and Tommy saying he'd find a way. Lily was crying, apparently, and told him to leave it alone. And then There's Dr. Croft. People are still whispering about those papers he burned, but Mrs. Tuttle says she saw him at the post office again yesterday, just standing outside, watching. It's got everyone thinking he's involved somehow. Miss Marple nodded, her fingers deftly looping the wool. Desperation and observation, she murmured. Both are such telling traits. I recall a case in my village, years ago, a young man accused of theft after a quarrel with his sweetheart. It turned out to be a misunderstanding, but the quarrel revealed more than the theft ever did. People's alliances, Joan, are as revealing as their alibis. Determined to probe deeper, Miss Marple set out after breakfast, her shawl wrapped against the gusty morning. The high street was alive with its usual hum, but the wind carried snatches of conversation. Tommy's name, Mrs. Wilkins' nocturnal wanderings, Dr. Croft's shadowed past. Her first stop was the village shop, where she hoped to find Lily Carter and perhaps learn more about Tommy's troubles. The shop was quiet, with only a few customers browsing the shelves. Lily stood behind the counter, her auburn hair pulled back in a neat bun, but her eyes were shadowed, as though sleep had eluded her. She managed a smile as Miss Marple approached, clutching a small packet of envelopes as a pretext. "Good morning, Lily," Miss Marple said, her voice warm. "I need some envelopes for my correspondence." "You look tired, my dear. Is everything all right?" Lily's smile faltered, and she busied herself with the till. "Morning, Miss Marple. It's been hard with all this talk about Tommy. He's not himself, and I don't know how to help him. Everyone's saying such awful things." Miss Marple's expression was one of gentle sympathy. "It's a trying time, I'm sure. I heard you and Tommy had a disagreement yesterday. Young love can be so tempestuous, can't it?" Lily's cheeks flushed, and she lowered her voice. "It wasn't a disagreement, not really. He's just so worried about money. We want to get married, move to London, but it's so expensive. Yesterday he was talking about borrowing money, said he'd found someone who could help, but he wouldn't tell me who. I told him to be careful, but he got upset, said I didn't trust him." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes keen but kind. "Borrowing money can be a dangerous path, Lily. Did he mention anything about the letter or the ransom note?" Lily shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, nothing like that. He just said he'd find a way to make things right. But I'm scared, Miss Marple. What if he's mixed up in something?" There, Miss Marple said, patting her hand. "Fear makes shadows seem larger than they are. Keep faith in Tommy, and the truth will come out." As she left the shop, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Tommy's mysterious benefactor. A loan suggested need, but also connection, someone in the village with means and motive. Her next stop was the post office, where she hoped to gauge Harold Wilkins' state of mind and perhaps learn more about his wife's late-night wanderings. Inside, the post office was subdued, the temporary clerk from Radford sorting letters with a bored air. Harold Wilkins stood behind the counter, his face drawn and his hands fidgeting with a ledger. The bell's chime brought a flicker of unease to his eyes, but he managed a nod as Miss Marple approached. "Good morning, Mr. Wilkins," she said, producing a small parcel. "I thought I'd send this to my friend in Bath. You must be under such strain with all this talk." Wilkins sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Morning, Miss Marple. It's been a trial, I won't lie. That ransom note's made things worse. Mrs. Hargrove's convinced it's an inside job, and the village is pointing at my Margaret. She's not been herself, I admit, but it's the worry, not guilt. Last night she went out late, said she needed air, but I don't know where she went. We had a row about money, you see. She's been spending more than we can afford. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was alert. Money can strain even the strongest bonds, she said. Did she mention anything about the letter or the post office? Wilkins shook his head, his voice low. Nothing, but she's been so jumpy. I asked her if she knew anything, and she got angry, said I didn't trust her. But I can't help wondering, she was here that evening before the letter went missing. What if she saw something and won't say? Miss Marple nodded, her tone soothing. It's natural to worry, Mr. Wilkins, but secrets have a way of coming to light, especially in a village like this. As she left the post office, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Mrs. Wilkins' late-night walk. It suggested restlessness, perhaps guilt, but also opportunity. She decided to visit the vicarage, hoping to learn more about Mrs. Hargrove's visit and the rumored family secret. The vicarage was a quaint, ivy-covered house beside the church, its garden neat despite the wind's mischief. The vicar, Mr. Clement, a mild-mannered man with a penchant for theology, welcomed Miss Marple with a smile, ushering her into a study lined with books. Miss Marple, how kind of you to visit, he said, offering her a chair. I suppose you've heard about Mrs. Hargrove's visit. She was quite upset, asked for prayers for her stolen legacy. Miss Marple settled into the chair, her expression one of polite curiosity. Yes, I heard. It's a troubling business, this missing letter. Did she mention anything about its contents? I understand there's talk of a family secret. Mr. Clement hesitated, his fingers tracing the edge of a Bible. She was vague, I'm afraid. Said it was about her late husband's will, something about an inheritance. But she hinted at a codicil, something that might affect her nephew abroad. She was quite emotional, said it could ruin her if it came to light. I offered what comfort I could, but she seemed more angry than distressed. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her smile remained gentle. How interesting. A codicil could change many things, couldn't it? Thank you, Mr. Clement. You've been most helpful. As she left the vicarage, Miss Marple's mind wove the new threads into the pattern. Tommy's mysterious loan, Mrs. Wilkins' nocturnal walk, Doctor, Croft's watchful presence, and Mrs. Hargrove's hint of a codicil. The nephew abroad was a new piece, suggesting a motive beyond money, perhaps tied to family pride or shame. Back at Joan's cottage, the evening brought Mrs. Clara Bantry, her face alight with fresh gossip. Miss Marple, you'll never believe it. They're saying Tommy borrowed money from Dr. Croft. Mrs. Tuttle overheard Lily talking about it at the shop, said Tommy needed it for their future, but Croft was the one he went to. And there's more. Someone saw Mrs. Wilkins near the churchyard last night, just before midnight. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. Alone? From Dr. Croft, she said, and Mrs. Wilkins abroad in the night. How very illuminating. Alliances shift, Mrs. Bantry, and alibis crumble. But the truth, like a stubborn thread, always finds its way. Joan, curled up by the fire, looked puzzled. You think Tommy's mixed up with Doctor Croft, Aunt Jane? or that Mrs. Wilkins was up to something. "I think," Miss Marple replied, "that everyone has a reason to hide and a reason to act. The trick is finding where those reasons meet. In St. Mary Mead, the truth is never far from the surface, if one only knows where to look." As the wind howled outside, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the web of alliances and alibis now emerging. Tommy's desperation, Mrs. Wilkins' secrecy, Dr. Croft's involvement, and Mrs. Hargrove's guarded hints. They were all part of a larger pattern, one she was beginning to discern in the flickering light of suspicion. Chapter 8. The False Lead. The seventh day in St. Mary Mead brought a restless energy, as if the village itself were straining against the weight of its unresolved mystery. The wind had died down, leaving a crisp stillness that sharpened the edges of every sound. The clatter of a milk cart, the murmur of voices outside the tea shop, the distant toll of the church bell. The missing letter, now a week gone, had woven a tight net of suspicion around the post office and its denizens, with each new rumor tightening the strands. Miss Jane Marple, seated at Joan's breakfast table with her knitting idle, sipped her tea as her niece relayed the morning's gossip, her mind sifting through the village's tangled tales with quiet precision. "Aunt Jane, it's like a hornet's nest out there," Joan said, buttering a slice of toast with vigorous strokes. "They've found something new at the post office, a torn envelope in Dr. Croft's waste bin at the surgery. Mrs. Price swears it's the same kind as Mrs. Hargrove's letter with a London postmark. Everyone's saying he must have taken it, maybe burned the rest with those papers. And Tommy's back at work, but he's avoiding everyone, even Lily. Oh, and Mrs. Wilkins was seen arguing with her husband in their garden last night. Mrs. Tuttle heard them from the lane, something about money and trust." Miss Marple's eyes, bright behind her spectacles, flickered with interest. "A torn envelope in Dr. Croft's bin," she murmured, setting her teacup down. "How very convenient." And Mrs. Wilkins arguing with her husband, such a public display for a private matter. I recall a case in my village, years ago, when a stolen necklace was blamed on a maid because her hairpin was found nearby. It turned out to be a deliberate plant. Clues, Joan, can be as misleading as they are revealing. Joan paused, her toast halfway to her mouth. "You think the envelope's a trick, Aunt Jane? But why would someone put it in Dr. Croft's bin?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. "To point fingers, perhaps, or to muddy the waters. In a village like this, a clue left in plain sight is often meant to be found. But let us see for ourselves." Determined to probe this new development, Miss Marple set out after breakfast, her shawl wrapped against the morning chill. The high street was alive with its usual bustle, but the air carried a charge of anticipation, as if the village were waiting for the next act in its unfolding drama. Her first stop was the post office, where she hoped to gauge Tommy's mood and perhaps learn more about the Wilkins quarrel. Inside, the post office was subdued, the temporary clerk from Radford gone, and Tommy Bates back at his post, sorting letters with a sullen air. Harold Wilkins stood behind the counter, his face pale and his hands fidgeting with a stack of envelopes. The bell's chime announced Miss Marple's arrival, and both men looked up, their expressions a mix of weariness and wariness. "Good morning, Mr. Wilkins? Tommy?" Miss Marple said, producing a small letter from her bag. "I thought I'd post this to my friend in Exeter." "I'm glad to see you back, Tommy. Feeling better, I hope?" Tommy nodded curtly, his eyes avoiding hers. "Morning, Miss Marple. Just a cold is all." "I'm fine now." Wilkins managed a strained smile. "It's good to have him back, Miss Marple, though it's been a trying time. This business with the envelope at Dr. Croft's surgery, it's got everyone talking again. I can't make sense of it. Why would he have it?" Miss Marple's tone was gentle but probing. "It is curious, isn't it? A torn envelope found so conveniently. Have you seen it, Mr. Wilkins? Does it resemble the one that went missing?" Wilkins shook his head, his fingers twisting the edge of his apron. "Not yet, but Constable Polk showed me a sketch. It's cream-colored, with a London postmark, like Mrs. Hargrove's. But Dr. Croft says it's just a medical bill he threw out." "I don't know what to think," Tommy muttered under his breath. "Sounds like someone's trying to pin it on him." Miss Marple's eyes flickered to Tommy, noting the edge in his voice. "An interesting theory, Tommy. And what of your own troubles? I hear you've had a difficult time with all this talk." Tommy's cheeks flushed, and he busied himself with the letters. "I didn't take that letter, Miss Marple. I wish people would leave me alone. I've got enough to worry about without this." "Of course," she said soothingly. "But worry can make one careless, can't it? I heard you were speaking to someone about money. A loan, perhaps?" Tommy's hands froze, and he glanced at Wilkins, then back at Miss Marple. "That's private, Miss Marple. I'm just trying to get by, same as anyone." Miss Marple nodded, her smile disarming. "Naturally, Tommy. I shan't pry. But in a village like this, privacy is a rare commodity." As she left the post office, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the torn envelope in Dr. Croft's bin. Its discovery was too neat, too timely, and she suspected it was a deliberate distraction, much like the hairpin that had pointed to Mrs. Wilkins. Her next stop was the surgery, where she hoped to confront Dr. Croft about this new clue. The surgery was quiet, with only a few patients waiting in the small reception area. Miss Marple, claiming a follow-up for her rheumatism, was ushered into Dr. Croft's consulting room. He sat at his desk, his lean face composed, but his eyes wary, as though expecting trouble. "Good morning, Doctor." "Croft," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair. "I hope I'm not intruding. I heard about the envelope found in your waste bin." What a curious turn of events. Croft's jaw tightened, but his voice was steady. "Miss Marple, I've told Constable Polk everything. It was a medical bill, nothing more. I get dozens of letters from London, colleagues, suppliers, the like. Someone's trying to stir up trouble, and I've no patience for it." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was sharp. "Of course, Doctor Croft. But it's odd, isn't it? A torn envelope, so similar to Mrs. Hargrove's, found in your bin. Have you any idea who might wish to cast suspicion on you?" Croft's eyes flashed, and for a moment his calm faltered. "I've no enemies here, Miss Marple, if that's what you mean. I keep to myself, do my work. If someone's planting evidence, they're wasting their time. I've nothing to hide." Miss Marple nodded, her tone gentle. "I'm sure you're right. But villages do love their stories, don't they? Thank you for your time, Doctor Croft." As she left the surgery, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the envelope's convenient discovery. It was a classic red herring, designed to divert attention. But from whom? She decided to visit the tea shop, where the village's pulse beat strongest. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of scones and tea, and the tables were crowded with familiar faces. Mrs. Price, as ever, held court, her voice sharp with conviction. "It's Doctor Croft, I'm telling you," she declared. "That envelope's proof enough." "Why else would he be burning papers? He's hiding something. Mark my words." Mrs. Tuttle, stirring her tea, shook her head. "I'm not so sure." "What about Tommy? I saw him talking to that poacher, Ned Harris, yesterday, near the woods. Looked secretive, if you ask me. Maybe they're in it together." Miss Marple, seated nearby with her tea, listened without appearing to. The mention of Ned Harris, the local poacher, was new, and she recalled a rumor that he'd been seen near the post office around the time of the theft. Deciding to pursue this lead, she finished her tea and made her way to the edge of the village, where Ned Harris was known to frequent a small copse. She found him near a hedgerow, mending a snare with deft fingers. He was a wiry man in his 30s, with a weathered face and a wary demeanor. He looked up as Miss Marple approached, his eyes narrowing. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, his tone guarded. "What brings you out here?" "Good morning, Mr. Harris," she replied, her smile disarming. "I was just taking a walk, enjoying the air. I hear you've been seen about the village lately, near the post office. Such a curious business, this missing letter." Harris snorted, his hand stilling. "I heard about that, but I've got no part in it. I was near the post office, sure, checking my traps. Got an alibi, too, old mister. Grayson saw me by his barn that night, fixing a gate. Ask him." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "Of course, Mr. Harris. It's only natural for people to notice things in a village like this. Thank you for your time." As she walked back to the village, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the poacher's alibi. It was solid enough, and yet the mention of him with Tommy suggested another distraction, another false lead. She recalled a case in her village where a stolen watch had been blamed on a vagrant, only to be found in the accuser's own drawer. Red herrings swim in schools, she thought, her lips curving slightly. Back at Joan's cottage, the evening brought news of a new development. Mrs. Clara Bantry arrived, her face alight with excitement. "Miss Marple, they've arrested Ned Harris." Constable Paul caught him with stolen goods, some silver from a house in Radford. They're saying he might have taken the letter too, though there's no proof. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. "How very convenient," she said. "But convenience, Mrs. Bantry, is often a sign of misdirection. Red herrings are plentiful, but the truth is singular." Joan, curled up by the fire, looked puzzled. "You don't think it's Ned, Aunt Jane?" "I think," Miss Marple replied, "that someone is working very hard to keep our eyes elsewhere. But the truth, like a needle in a haystack, is there if you know where to look." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's mind wove the threads together. The torn envelope in Croft's bin, Tommy's secretive talk with the poacher, Mrs. Wilkins' public quarrel, and Mrs. Hargrove's guarded hints about a codicil. The mystery was a maze of false leads, but she was certain the path to the truth was growing clearer, hidden in the alliances and alibis of Saint Mary Mead. Chapter 9. Piecing the Puzzle. The 8th day in Saint Mary Mead dawned with a quiet intensity, as though the village itself were poised on the edge of revelation. The arrest of Ned Harris, the local poacher, had sent ripples of excitement through the community. But the missing letter remained elusive, its absence a persistent thorn in the village's side. The post office, now a symbol of mistrust, stood under a pall of scrutiny, its every occupant weighed in the balance of public opinion. Miss Jane Marple, sensing the mystery's threads drawing tighter, decided it was time to gather the suspects for a clearer view of the pattern. She sat in Joan's sitting room, her knitting idle as she sipped tea, her mind as sharp as the morning light filtering through the lace curtains. "Aunt Jane, the village is buzzing again," Joan said, setting a plate of scones on the table. "Ned Harris's arrest has everyone talking, but they're still convinced it's someone closer to the post office. Tommy, Mrs. Wilkins, even Doctor. Croft, Mrs. Price, says she saw Tommy talking to Lily again, and he looked guilty as sin. And Mrs. Hargrove's been to the constable's office, demanding action. Oh, and there's talk that the letter might have been hidden in the post office all along. Mrs. Tuttle swears she saw Mr. Wilkins poking around the sorting table late last night." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "Hidden in plain sight," she murmured. "How very intriguing. And Mr. Wilkins at the sorting table, such a curious detail. I recall a case in my village years ago where a stolen locket was found in the very drawer everyone had searched. The simplest hiding places are often the cleverest." Joan tilted her head, her brow furrowed. "You think the letter's still there, Aunt Jane? But why would someone hide it instead of taking it?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. "To control the game, perhaps, or to create a distraction. But I think, Joan, it's time we brought the players together. A little clarity can do wonders for a tangled puzzle." With a plan forming, Miss Marple sent word through Mrs. Bantry, inviting the key figures, Harold Wilkins, Tommy Bates, Doctor, Elias Croft, and Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, to Joan's cottage that afternoon for tea and clarification. Mrs. Wilkins, still reportedly unwell, was excused, but Miss Marple noted her absence with interest. The invitation was framed as a neighborly gesture, but her true intent was to observe the suspects together, to see how their stories held under pressure. By 3 o'clock, the sitting room was arranged with chairs in a loose circle, a tea tray laden with Joan's best china, and a fire crackling in the hearth to ward off the autumn chill. Miss Marple, in her usual shawl and straw hat, greeted each guest with a serene smile, her eyes missing nothing. Harold Wilkins arrived first, his hands fidgeting and his face pale. "Miss Marple, I hope this isn't more trouble," he said, his voice strained. "I've told everything I know to Constable Pauk." "Of course, Mr. Wilkins," she replied, guiding him to a chair. "This is just a chance to clear the air." "Tea?" Tommy Bates followed, his lanky frame slouched and his eyes wary. "Didn't expect to be invited here," he muttered, glancing at Joan. "Hope this isn't about blaming me again." "Not at all, Tommy," Miss Marple said soothingly. "We're simply trying to understand." "Please, sit." Dr. Croft entered next, his lean face composed, but his posture stiff, as though bracing for an ambush. "Miss Marple, I trust this is necessary," he said, his tone clipped. "I've patience to see." "Your time is appreciated, Doctor." "Croft," she replied, her smile disarming. "It won't take long." Mrs. Hargrove swept in last, her black dress rustling and her eyes sharp with indignation. Miss Marple, I hope you have a good reason for this, she snapped, taking a chair with the air of a queen on a throne. I'm not accustomed to being summoned like a common suspect. Merely a gathering of neighbors, Mrs. Hargrove, Miss Marple said, pouring tea. Now, shall we begin? As Joan served scones, Miss Marple began, her voice gentle but deliberate. This missing letter has caused such a stir in St. Mary Mead, and I thought it might help to share what we know. Mr. Wilkins, you've said the letter was on the sorting table locked in the post office that night. Tommy, you confirmed you checked the locks. Dr. Croft, you were there posting a letter. And Mrs. Hargrove, you've told us the letter concerns your inheritance. Yet it's gone, and we have a torn envelope corner, a hairpin, a ransom note, and now talk of the letter hidden in the post office itself. Wilkins shifted uncomfortably, his hands twisting. I swear, Miss Marple, I locked up tight. I checked the table before closing, and the letter was there. I don't know how it vanished. Tommy's face reddened, his voice defensive. I did my job, same as always. Locked the door, checked the windows. Someone must have got in after Dr. Croft's jaw tightened, but he spoke calmly. I've said it before. I posted a letter, nothing more. The envelope in my bin was a medical bill, as I told Paulk. This is all nonsense. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes flashed. Nonsense? My future was in that letter. Stocks, bonds, my late husband's legacy. And now I'm being blackmailed, with notes demanding £500. Someone in this room knows more than they're saying. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. Indeed, Mrs. Hargrove. Let us consider the clues. The torn envelope corner found under the counter suggests the letter was opened, or at least handled, before it vanished. The hairpin points to Mrs. Wilkins, yet she's been absent, avoiding scrutiny. The ransom note, typed and precise, implies calculation, yet no one came to collect the money, and now whispers that the letter never left the post office. It's almost as if someone wants us to believe it's still there. Wilkins paled, his voice trembling. I looked everywhere, Miss Marple. If it's there, it's hidden better than I can find. Tommy muttered, Sounds like someone's playing games. Why hide it? Why not just take it? Dr. Croft leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. This is a waste of time. If the letter's hidden, it's not my doing. I've no interest in Mrs. Hargrove's affairs. Mrs. Hargrove's voice rose, sharp with fury. Impossible! That letter holds my future, and I'll not have it toyed with. If it's in the post office, I demand it be found. Miss Marple raised a hand, her tone calm but commanding. Patience, my dears. The web unravels slowly. Let us consider motives. Mr. Wilkins, you've spoken of financial strain, and your wife's gambling has been much discussed. Tommy, your dreams of London require money, and you've sought a loan. Dr. Croft, your past in London has raised questions, though you dismiss them. And Mrs. Hargrove, you've hinted at a codicil, something that might affect your nephew abroad. Each of you has a reason to care about that letter, or to fear it. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. Wilkins' hands trembled, Tommy's jaw clenched, Croft's eyes darkened, and Mrs. Hargrove's face tightened, her lips a thin line. I'm not accusing anyone, Miss Marple continued, her voice soft. But I believe the letter is closer than we think, and the clues, the envelope, the hairpin, the note, are distractions, meant to keep us looking elsewhere. In my experience, The truth is often the simplest thing, hidden by the noise of suspicion. Mrs. Hargrove stood abruptly, her voice shaking. "This is absurd! I'm the victim here, not a suspect. I'll have no more of this nonsense." She stormed out, the door slamming behind her. Dr. Croft rose, his tone cold. "I've patients to attend, Miss Marple." "I trust this is the end of it." He followed, leaving a chill in his wake. Tommy hesitated, then muttered, "I've got work to do," and slipped out, avoiding Wilkins' gaze. Wilkins lingered, his face ashen. "Miss Marple, I don't know what to say. I've done nothing wrong, but this is tearing me apart. If the letter's in the post office, I'll find it, I swear." Miss Marple patted his arm, her smile kind. "I believe you, Mr. Wilkins, but sometimes what we seek is right before our eyes." As the guests departed, Joan turned to her aunt, her eyes wide. "Aunt Jane, you stirred them up like a nest of bees. Do you really think the letter's still in the post office?" Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. "I think, Joan, that someone has gone to great lengths to make us look in all the wrong places, but the truth, like a dropped stitch, is there if you know where to look." Mrs. Bantry, who had lingered to help clear the tea things, leaned in. "You've got them rattled, Miss Marple." "But who do you think it is?" Miss Marple smiled, her voice soft but certain. "The puzzle is nearly complete, Mrs. Bantry. We have only to place the final piece." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the morning's revelations. The torn envelope, now dismissed as a medical bill. The hairpin, too conveniently found. The ransom note, a bold but unfulfilled threat. And the hint of a codicil, tying the letter to Mrs. Hargrove's family secrets. The gathering had confirmed her suspicions. The truth was not in the clues themselves, but in the motives they obscured. In St. Mary Mead, the web of suspicion was tight, but Miss Marple was ready to cut through it. Chapter 10. The Shocking Twist. The 9th day in St. Mary Mead broke with a serene calm, the autumn sun casting a golden glow over the village, as if to soften the tension that had gripped it for over a week. The mystery of the missing letter had reached its crescendo, with the villagers' suspicions now a tangled knot of accusations and half-truths. The post office, once a hub of quiet routine, stood as a silent witness to the drama, its brass bell now a herald of secrets yet to be unveiled. Miss Jane Marple, seated in Joan's sitting room with her knitting in her lap, sipped her morning tea, her mind weaving the final threads of the puzzle she had so carefully unraveled. The gathering the previous day had confirmed her suspicions, and today she intended to lay bare the truth. "Aunt Jane, you've been awfully quiet this morning," Joan said, setting a plate of toast on the table. "After yesterday's tea, everyone's talking about how you rattled them, Mrs. Hargrove most of all. Mrs. Bantry says she saw her pacing in her garden last night, looking like she'd seen a ghost. And Tommy's been avoiding Lily, which has her in tears. Do you really think the letter's still in the post office?" Miss Marple's eyes, bright behind her spectacles, gleamed with quiet certainty. "The letter, Joan, is precisely where it was meant to be," she said, her needles pausing. "But it's not the letter itself that matters most. It's what it represents. I recall a case in my village years ago where a stolen diary caused such a stir, only to reveal a truth far simpler than the gossip suggested. Today, I think, We shall see the truth in Saint Mary Mead. Joan leaned forward, her eyes wide. You know who did it, don't you? Are you going to tell Constable Polk? Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. In due time, dear. But first I must be certain. A truth revealed too soon is like a cake taken from the oven half-baked. It falls apart. Determined to bring the mystery to its conclusion, Miss Marple sent word through Mrs. Bantry to invite the suspects, Harold Wilkins, Tommy Bates, Dr. Elias Croft, and Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, back to Joan's cottage that afternoon. She also requested Constable Polk's presence, framing it as a final clarification to put the village's mind at ease. Mrs. Wilkins, still absent, was noted but not pressed to attend, her absence a piece of the puzzle Miss Marple now understood. By 2:00, the sitting room was arranged much as it had been the day before, with chairs in a circle, a tea-tray gleaming with Joan's best china, and a fire crackling in the hearth. Miss Marple, in her familiar shawl and straw hat, greeted each guest with a serene smile, her eyes missing nothing. The air was thick with anticipation, each suspect carrying the weight of their own secrets. Harold Wilkins arrived first, his hands trembling as he took a seat. Miss Marple, I hope this means an end to—
It? He said, his voice strained. I can't take much more of this suspicion. Tommy Bates followed, his lanky frame tense, his eyes darting to the door. I don't know why I'm here again, he muttered. I've said all I know. Dr. Croft entered with his usual brisk stride, his lean face composed, but his eyes wary. Miss Marple, I trust this will be brief, he said, his tone clipped. I've had enough of this nonsense. Mrs. Hargrove swept in last, her black dress rustling, her face a mask of indignation. Miss Marple, this is becoming intolerable, she snapped, taking a chair with a regal air. I'm the victim here, and I'll not be treated like a criminal. Constable Polk arrived, his notebook in hand, his expression one of weary determination. Miss Marple, you've got something to share, I take it, he said, settling near the door. Miss Marple poured tea, her movements deliberate, her voice calm but commanding. Thank you all for coming. This business with the missing letter has caused such a stir in St. Mary Mead, and I believe it's time we put it to rest. Let us review the facts. A letter, addressed to Mrs. Hargrove, vanished from the post office's sorting table, despite locked doors and windows. We have a torn envelope corner, a hairpin, a ransom note that led to nothing, and whispers of the letter hidden in plain sight. Each clue has pointed to someone, Mr. Wilkins, Tommy, Dr. Croft, even Mrs. Wilkins, but I believe they are distractions designed to obscure the truth. Wilkins shifted uncomfortably, his hands twisting. I've searched everywhere, Miss Marple. If it's in the post office, it's hidden where no one can find it. Tommy's voice was sharp. It's not me, I swear. I locked up proper. Like I said, Dr. Croft's jaw tightened. I've said it before. That envelope in my bin was a bill, nothing more. This is a waste of time. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes flashed. A waste? My future was in that letter. I'll not rest until it's found and the thief is punished. Miss Marple raised a hand, her tone gentle but firm. Patience, please. Let us consider the motives. Mr. Wilkins, your financial troubles and your wife's gambling have been much discussed. Tommy, your dreams of London and your loan from Dr. Croft suggest desperation. Dr. Croft, your past in London and your burning of papers raise questions. And Mrs. Hargrove, You've spoken of an inheritance, but also a codicil that might affect your nephew abroad. Each of you has a reason to care about that letter, or to fear it." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. Miss Marple continued, her voice soft but relentless. "But I believe the letter never left the post office, not because it was stolen, but because it was hidden deliberately by someone who needed to control its fate. The torn envelope corner was a plant, the hairpin a distraction, the ransom note a bluff to feign victimhood. And I believe that someone is you, Mrs. Hargrove." Mrs. Hargrove's face paled, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. "This is outrageous. I'm the victim here. How dare you accuse me?" Miss Marple's eyes were steady, her smile serene. "You underestimated village eyes, Mrs. Hargrove. The letter contained a codicil to your late husband's will, one that disinherited you for forging his signature to secure your wealth. You learned of it from the solicitor's office and knew it would ruin you. So, during a distraction at the post office, perhaps when Tommy was busy with a customer, you slipped in, took the letter, and hid it in your handbag. The torn corner was from your own stationery, left to mislead. The ransom notes were your doing, typed on your own typewriter to cast yourself as a victim and divert suspicion." The room was deathly still, all eyes on Mrs. Hargrove. Wilkins gasped, Tommy's jaw dropped, and Croft's eyes narrowed. Paulk's pencil hovered over his notebook, his face a mix of shock and fascination. Mrs. Hargrove's voice trembled, but she held her ground. "This is absurd. You've no proof, Miss Marple, none at all." Miss Marple's tone remained calm. "Oh, but I do. The torn envelope corner matches the stationery in your study. I saw a sheet of it when I visited Hargrove Hall. The typewriter's ribbon, with its distinctive smudge, matches the ransom note's ink, which Constable Paulk can verify. And your agitation, Mrs. Hargrove, has been too theatrical, too calculated. You feared the codicil's revelation not just for your wealth, but for a deeper secret." Mrs. Hargrove's face crumpled, her hands shaking. "You can't know that," she whispered. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "The letter also revealed that, Doctor. Croft is your illegitimate son, born before your marriage and kept secret to protect your reputation. You planned to secure his future with your wealth, but the codicil's exposure of your forgery would have ruined you both. So you hid the letter, intending to destroy it later and stage the theft to cover your tracks." Dr. Croft stood abruptly, his face ashen. "That's enough, Miss Marple. This is my life you're tearing apart." Mrs. Hargrove's voice broke, a sob escaping her lips. "I did it for him," she whispered, "for Elias. I forged the will to secure the estate, to give him a future. When I learned of the codicil, I panicked. I took the letter, hid it in my study. The notes were to throw suspicion elsewhere. I never meant for it to go this far." Constable Paulk rose, his notebook snapping shut. "Mrs. Hargrove, I'll need you to come with me. We'll search your study and verify the letters there." Mrs. Hargrove nodded, her shoulders sagging, as Paulk led her out. Croft followed, his face a mask of anguish, casting a final glance at Miss Marple. Wilkins and Tommy sat stunned, the weight of the truth settling over them. As the door closed, Joan turned to her aunt, her eyes wide. "Aunt Jane, how did you know?" Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her voice soft. "Human nature, dear. It's always the same: greed, fear, love, all woven together. Mrs. Hargrove's love for her son drove her to desperate acts, but her theatrics betrayed her. In St. Mary Mead, the truth is never far from sight. Mrs. Bantry, who had lingered by the fire, shook her head. "You've done it again, Miss Marple." But poor Dr. Croft, what a shock! Miss Marple sighed, her eyes distant. Yes, poor man. The things we do for family can be the heaviest burden of all. As the fire crackled, the mystery of the missing letter was laid to rest, its truth a stark reminder of the secrets that lurk beneath the surface of even the quietest village. Miss Marple, her knitting steady, knew that St. Mary Mead would soon return to its gentle rhythms, but the echoes of this truth would linger, a testament to the power of observation and the frailty of human hearts.